John MacPhee is the CEO of the JED Foundation, a national nonprofit created to prevent suicide among teens and young adults. Under John's leadership, JED has grown from a 6-employee organization to a staff of more than 100, implementing a $25 million annual budget. JED helps systems and people support emerging adults as a primary means of combating the mental health epidemic threatening young Americans. Welcome to the Science of Good, where we sit down with cause leaders who are disrupting the status quo, tackling our toughest societal problems, and seeking better ways to spark change. Welcome, John. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on.
We're excited to get into this conversation. So as we get started, tell us a little bit about the history and the work of the JED Foundation.
Sure. So the JED Foundation is a charity, actually 25 years old, that is focused on protecting emotional health and preventing suicide for young people, for teenagers, for young adults. And the organization was created by a family who lost their 20-year-old son to suicide. And while they knew that he was struggling and he had been receiving some help, they did not know that he was a threat to himself. And after he died, they came to learn that there were a number of people who were worried about him. He went to college. He was at the University of Arizona. There were a bunch of people who were worried about him, but the dots weren't connected, to sort of paint a picture that this was a young man who needed help urgently. And so the family had a conversation with the president of the university, and that president said, "Tell me what to do to protect the mental health of these 30,000 students, and I will do it. But I have no idea what that looks like." And as it turned out, when the family, researched this question, there were no guidelines. There was no sort of expectation or framework for what a school should do to support the mental health of students and reduce risk for suicide. And that's why the JED Foundation was created.
Well, John, one of the things that strikes me as so remarkable is the growth that's happened under your leadership. How do you manage that kind of growth in terms of staff, operations? I'd love to hear more about your vision for that growth and how you managed it.
Yeah. So, well, thanks for that. I joined in 2011. The organization had great ideas, a great framework. Pretty much everything we do now was up on the board, conceived, but it wasn't funded and it hadn't been operationalized. I saw the promise in that and was excited by it and joined. But it's a whole team that does it, the board, the staff, et cetera. But we have, to your point, we have grown from 5 or 6 people to 100 people, from a $1 million budget to a $25 million budget over these years. And I'd say, the keys are, well, one thing is, youth mental health, depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, behavior, stress, all of these things. Mm-hmm. Actually, it was in 2011 that the trends really all started going the wrong way. So, it wasn't purposeful, but when I joined was when youth mental health really started to become an increasingly worrisome issue in our country. But I would say the first key to the growth was really purposeful planning and goal setting. We really set out and created long-term plans, and we've been operating with 5-year plans, that we update every 3 years this whole time. So we know what we're aiming for, and we can explain what we're aiming for to funders. And I think that that's really, really important. We also have very clear logic models. We call them impact frameworks, but essentially logic models for the organization and for our programs. And we're really, thorough and meticulous around data collection and evaluation. So those are just some pieces in response to your question that I think really did help fuel our growth. And helped convince funders to invest in us and invest in that growth.
I love 5-year plans that are revisited every 3 years. That is so smart, and a nice segue to another subject I want to cover. But I'm curious. You mentioned 2011 was a year when youth mental health became in focus. What was the tipping point?
Well, so, it's interesting. I think in retrospect, we look at 2011 with a lot of focus, but at the time, I don't think as a society, we understood what was happening in real time to youth mental health at that time.
Mhm.
So we can look at 2011 and say, 2010, 2011, and say that's when the internet met the phone. And so a lot of
Mhm.
things changed. The amount of information that we got and we get became overwhelming, right? That information is commercialized, to try to get our attention. So it tends to be more negative, and sort of, I don't know, inflammatory and negative than the actual world is. And that can be overwhelming. But one of the things I think that isn't talked about enough is the opportunity cost of the screen time. So before we even get into whether the screen time is harmful or not,
Mhm.
um, young people, teenagers spend like 7 hours a day or more on a screen. So they're spending less time face to face with friends, less time playing outside, less time dating, and less time in family meals. And so there's a large opportunity cost. We had a massive shift in how we live our lives, that I and many think played a significant role during this period of time. But there were other things, um, war, racism, police violence, school shootings,
Mm.
climate change, a lot of sort of existential threats and existential dread, and a better understanding of those things. And I would also say young people that are more in tune to it, young people that want, to make the world a better place. And there's more income inequality that I also believe is a big driver of insecurity and anxiety. And so this is one of the reasons why I really like this field, because it's very complicated and complex. And it's one of the reasons why I like Jed's approach, because our approach is a very comprehensive, holistic, kind of approach in terms of how do you take the village and build a safety net.
One of the things you talked about, John, you mentioned in that plan of growth, it included funders. And you have attracted the support of some big names in philanthropy: Gates, Mackenzie Scott. What do you think? What do you think is really the draw that has the funders wanting to work with you all, wanting to work with the Jed Foundation?
Yeah, I think we have a great team, a clear mission. As I said, we're very clear about what we do and the theory of change, and I think that that's attractive. But we also collect a lot of data, and we're very thorough on that. So our college program, which is called JED Campus, we work with colleges for 4 years. We have worked with 300 that have done this for 4 years with us, and there's another 200 or so that are working with us now. The data show that the students at schools that work with us experience significant reductions in suicide attempts, suicidal planning, suicidal ideation, improvements in depression, anxiety rates. So the results are very real, and I think that really drives and helps in these discussions with funders. And a lot of the funders, have found us, actually, as opposed to us, finding them, which we're really grateful for.
That's a good problem to have. They found you.
Yeah. Yeah. But that said, to be clear, it's very stressful, the fundraising side. And like so many nonprofits, on the one hand, we're financially sound. We have about 1 year of go forward money in the bank, and you look at our financials, and we're strong, but it's fragile. It's fragile. We're dependent upon philanthropy. We're dependent upon major gifts. And it's something I spend a lot of my time on, in addition to our team members.
John, that's a great segue. Um, Heading up a foundation, heading up a nonprofit is so stressful. I'm aware you've got operational issues to think about. You've got a passionate staff. The data is demonstrating the need for what you all do. Is compelling to funders, but you're trying to figure out how to secure and sustain the work you're doing in the field, and sustaining and engaging your staff. It's a lot to take on. Of it all, what do you think is the most difficult aspect of your job?
Okay, that is a good question. Um, I'd say that I probably am most anxious about the sustainability and the fundraising, but I don't think that's the most difficult part. I think
Hmm.
that's I think the part that I just worry about because people's jobs are at stake and the great work and that
Right.
and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm not finding it so easy to answer the question about what's the most difficult. Probably, um, that there's just so many things that come at us and that are involved. There's a lot of knocks on our door to look at certain things or to help. And probably I'm switching my answer a little bit. And also, there's a lot of vicarious trauma, specifically in what we do at the JED Foundation. We're working with so many community-based organizations and schools that the volume that we're working with, just mathematically, our staff is working with organizations that probably have, at least 1,000 deaths a year. So, they're sort of, one step away in advising on crisis response and postvention situations that are occurring every day. And so, how do you, manage a team, sort of through that in a way. And we come at it with great hope and optimism, and there's a lot of, beauty in the work but, just sort of managing that, and then just worrying about whether, we're managing it well enough or kindly enough or supportive enough. That I'd say that's you know not easy to figure out the best way that should be done.
Well, with fragile issues, and this is one, you want it, you want your approach and how you address it to be perfect. And there's no way any of us can achieve that.
Yeah.
John, there's something that you said that I wanted to highlight because I would guess that a lot of nonprofits deal with this is staying focused on your assignment. And you talked about having a lot of things coming at you and how do you stay focused on what your mission and what your values are. So my question is, how do you do that?
Yeah, so that's a real balance and a really important question. So I think one way we do it is our mission is clear. And, well, first of all, on one hand, our mission is clear. We support teenagers and young adults, on mental health and suicide prevention. But anything that causes distress to a young person can, be a problem. So anything that causes distress is in scope. So it's both narrow and broad at the same time. But we have, like I said, a very clear logic model, very clear objectives. Each year we have clear objectives and in that 5-year horizon. So that helps us, that's an arbiter of like, well, what are we going to do? What are we not going to do? At the
Mhm.
same time, one of the biggest things that we work on is this idea of help giving, right? We don't want mental health to just be talking to the person who's in distress with messages that might be like, it's okay to struggle. And if you're struggling, there's no shame in that. And you should reach out. We want to talk to the whole community and be like, listen, if you're concerned about somebody else, lean in. Let them know you're there for them. Ask them if they're okay, right? We want to, sort of build up the support systems and the help giving. So in the spirit of that, we have guiding principles that guide how we work and how we show up for each other. One of them is we are help givers. So that means if we're help givers, we're open the door when somebody knocks and we're like, well, what do you need? And can you help? So there's these two things are at odds with each other about being really focused. But then if we get, a call or a situation that, we want to be responsive to it. And so I can't give you a clear answer because it's like in the balance and we talk about it and it sort of happens every day where we're like, yes, no, not us, but let us connect you to these folks over here, you know, um,
Mhm.
and we just try to balance it. We've gotten better at it. We have gotten better at it. And when I say better at it, that means we say no to more things now than we did a few years ago. I just don't think it can be an absolute decision rule. You have to sort of listen and understand what you're dealing with. And then from a management point of view, what that means is, you have to build in some excess capacity to know that some stuff is going to come at you that, you don't know what it is, but it's coming. And that's got to be built into the system a little bit.
Really smart. What it sounds like, Kevin, is they're really practicing being flexible.
Yeah. Speaking of really smart, from a behavioral change and communications point of view, I absolutely love Seize the Awkward, the PSA campaign that you all put together with help from the Ad Council. Big fan of their work. And what I love is the expected approach would have been talking to someone who is in distress, or someone who was having, self-injurious inner dialogue. But it's so smart to talk to that caregiver or the surround, because that audience is going to be more open to your messaging. So I think that's just so great. Anything you want to share about that strategic decision and how you arrived at that?
Yeah. So that decision goes back to like 2015, 2016. Back then, we saw that most messaging was what help-seeking messaging, right? Aimed at the person. And we had a thesis like, well, wait a minute, is that person even in a position to hear the messaging? And what about the people around them? So we did market research with Hope Lab, which is a group out of California, good friends of ours. And in that research, we learned that there was a huge opportunity here, because young people in the research told us that it was like 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 young people have been in situations where they know or strongly believe a friend was in distress. Right. So then, so we were like, we want to catalyze help giving behaviors, right? Now, our logic model for the organization, we literally have written down the attitudes and behaviors we're trying to change. Okay, like we're written down, and all of our and so this idea that we want to promote help giving behaviors is right in there. So that was the idea behind it. Right now, in this moment, we just released a new campaign with Uninterrupted, which is LeBron James production company, and two generation, right? Master P and his son, Jason Richardson, and his son, having conversations. It's like the same idea, but now bringing both sides together and having conversations and doing it across generations, because the data shows us that supportive adults are very, very important relationships for the mental health of young people. And so it's a twist on that same idea.
Love that.
Kevin, as the mom of teenagers, 16 and 14, I'm aware, John, that, the Jed Foundation has used celebrities that are contributing to your work. And I think that's really amazing. So how did you get this caliber of talent involved? How did you get them to say yes?
Well, many celebrities, have their own stories about their struggles with mental health, and they're really willing to talk about them, and they do talk about them. Selena Gomez, as an example, and Demi Lovato over the years, and others that we've worked with. So we just reach out in the ecosystem, and we connect, and we talk, and we try to, and we see if there's a fit, so it's always kind of like an organic thing that is happening, but it's something that you can't force either, Sure. And just over the years, we've been fortunate enough that a number of public figures have worked with us, and we've been really, really thrilled. Like Seize the Awkward, people like Megan Thee Stallion, Billie Eilish have been involved, and these are people that have really large fan bases, great influence, and when they're willing to talk about these issues, it can have just a tremendously positive impact on young people.
What's so great about that is it's introducing a social norm from a behavioral science point of view. This is a healthy, normal conversation to have across generations, or with your friends or peer group. One of the things that encourages me about the current generation, young generation, is that I would have said you're destigmatizing the issue. and you are, but mental health has less stigma now among young people than it did when the three of us were teenagers.
For
Yeah.
sure.
And that is a great thing.
Yes.
Yet the problem is getting worse, and for many reasons, some of which you've touched on earlier in this conversation. But if stigma is on the decline, which is terrific, what's the next dragon to slay?
So this is a really, really big topic because I think it's important in this field. So stigma has been a huge issue, and it still is, and it's waning, just as you said.
Right.
But I think the question has to start above stigma and start with, like, what are the knowledge, attitude, and behavioral barriers to help seeking and help giving? And there are barriers that are really significant and growing that are not stigma, or that I would argue are not stigma. In the Jed Foundation, we argue. So, for example, young people have a growing mistrust of older adults and institutions, right? That's not stigma, but it is curbing and slowing down help seeking, because they don't trust that help from older people and from institutions is going to be helpful. In our research, we show that young people, and especially those that have single parents, don't want to come forward with their issues because they don't want to put something else on the plate of their parents. They are protecting their parents, right? That's how they're looking at it. I would argue that's not stigma. And it's very nuanced, right? It's like, I don't talk a lot about the impacts of some things that have happened in my life around mental health. I'm not one bit ashamed about it, but it involves other people, other family members. And so it isn't really my story to tell, And so to me, I won't discuss certain things in this discussion or anywhere, because it's like in a code of conduct, I'm sort of protecting other people or respecting other people. So sometimes I think we overuse the word stigma, and then we're aiming at the wrong thing when we're trying to create behavior change. Hopefully I'm making sense,
That's very smart.
Yeah. So I just think, and one of the things that happens in this field is, again, nonprofits, we don't have a lot of money, but behavior change, think about, like, who's trying to create behavior change among young adults. Taco Bell is spending spending enormous amounts of money on market research and doing very sophisticated market research, and delivering very sophisticated campaigns. And that's really, the stakes are so high in what we all are trying to do, that's what we need to do. And that's why we partnered with Ad Council and with Uninterrupted, and to make sure that we're partnering with groups that are really sophisticated around this kind of work.
I love this. One of the things that we've noticed is you all don't call yourself a big nonprofit. You actually said you are a large, mid-sized nonprofit. That's pretty humble for all the big work that you're doing. So how big do you want to grow?
Yeah. So, on the one hand, we understand that to be a $25 million organization, 100 people, I think that puts us well into the top 1%. If you take out hospitals and universities, I believe then we're in the top 1% in terms of size of all nonprofits. But yeah, I like to think of us as like you said, a large, medium sized. I think the key is not to grow for growth's sake, right? And but we have some new programs. Like, we have a program for school districts that's a partnership with the Superintendents Association that I think has enormous potential and will really, really grow. And then we'll need to grow with it. We have a new program for community-based organizations as well. So I could see us, but I want it to happen, to show itself. We'll raise money for it. I could see us growing, over the next 5 years from 100 people to 150, from 25 million to 35 million, maybe to 40 million. But I don't think, unless we change something really fundamental, I think that's about the size that we're aiming for and that we should be.
Sure. So, John, one of the things that we always do with a guest is we have the previous guest ask you a question, and then we give you an opportunity to ask our next guest a question. And so, our previous guest wanted to ask you, John, what brings you hope for the future?
Okay. Who was the previous guest?
So our previous guest was Kevin Doyle with the Betty Hazelton Foundation. Are you familiar
Right.
with him?
Yes, yes. So that's awesome. Okay. So what gives me hope?
Yes.
Um,
What brings you hope for the future?
Well, I mean, I'd say it's young people. I think that they're amazing, and they're of course the beneficiaries of our work, and so we're working with young people all the time. I would say that today's generation is the most inclusive. That they are very optimistic as well. They want to make the world a better place. They're worried about the world,
Mhm.
but they're passionate, and so they give me a lot of hope and optimism. What I also would say, we're in a lot of spaces where you hear older people, like I'm a Gen X, 57-year-old Gen X parent of a 28 and 30-year-old. In a lot of forums, I hear older people like myself, in my age, say something like, it's time for us to get out of the way, let the young people go, et cetera. And, my belief is, yeah, there's truth to that, but don't get out of the way, like follow and help, so like people in our generation, we've built the networks, we have connections, we have influence, so don't get out of the way. I mean, follow, listen, include, but then do everything you can with what you have to help. You follow what I'm saying? It's
Mhm.
like, it's not time to exit. No way. It is time to, to really follow young people and to help them um, speed things up and make it easier for them, as we go forward.
That exiting, getting out of the way fully, would only support the mistrust and lack of belief in older people and institutions. So I love that philosophy as a living example of the work you're trying to do.
Yeah.
Speaking of that work, John, it's just been such a pleasure to have you with us today and to learn more about the foundation and your leadership there. It's always inspiring to talk with people who are tackling what are really, really difficult, complex problems that often can be mitigated, but may not. It's not something we're going to solve in our lifetime. And having the kind of grit to grind through that and is what we're all about. And I know that other nonprofit leaders can benefit from your story and your approach. So thank you for being with us today, and thank you so much for believing in good.
Thank you. Thank you both.
The Science of Good interviews support the work of For Goodness Sakes, a communications firm that uses behavioral change principles to help nonprofits and government agencies advance social causes. Learn more at fgsakes.com.